at the library today. Imagine your story at the library today.
Welcome to Upcycling University, part of High Plains Library District's 2020 Summer Reading Adventure. My name is Bridget Parker. In Upcycling University, we'll explore the what's, whys, and hows of creating amazing new things by upcycling. I'll show you how to make a project that you can take with you and use over and over while saving the planet. And you'll leave with wonderful resources and inspiration for becoming an upcycling master. What is upcycling? Upcycling is taking something old or unwanted and turning it into something new instead of throwing it away. Why would you want to do that? Here are 3 great reasons. Number 1, upcycling lets you flex your creativity and hone your skills to make something truly unique. Your upcycled item will be one of a kind. Number 2, the green stuff. Is your budget a little tight, or would you just rather spend your money on candy or leaf tickets? Since upcycling uses things you can find on the cheap or for free, a really great project can cost nothing or next to nothing. Ka-ching! Number 3, we all need to be using our creativity to take care of the earth. Upcycling goes a long way towards reducing pollution and keeping our planet habitable and beautiful. How's that? New things cost more than just the money you might pay online or at the store. They don't just appear when you need them and disappear when you are done. Consider the plastic fork seen here in its natural habitat. Wait, seen here in its habitat. Where do these come from anyway? They begin life in a factory. Manufacturing items like this plastic fork uses water, energy, and time, and has byproducts like pollution and waste. You use this fork once to eat your macaroni and cheese. Yum! How useful! But after an item like this is no longer wanted or needed, it doesn't just disappear. It has to go somewhere, often a landfill, or worse, it becomes litter. This costs us our clean air, land, and water. Even recycling can only do so much. Only about 15% of plastics even get recycled, and the process of recycling uses more water and energy and produces more pollution. It's so much better for our environment if we try to reuse what we already have instead of replacing it with new stuff. I'm going to talk about plastic now because it's unique among the materials we use to make stuff. It's not the only thing we throw away, but it poses some special problems. Don't worry though, humans are amazingly creative and good at solving problems. The technology for making plastic began to be developed around 1850 and has been advancing ever since. Plastic became popular in a hurry since it is cheap, durable, and easy to mold into whatever you can imagine. It has endless potential. Plastics are super helpful in many ways, such as keeping food fresh, keeping medical supplies sterile, and making things that don't corrode or leak. Unfortunately, because it is so easy and cheap to make things with plastic, we've gotten in the habit of using it once and then throwing it away, because it's more convenient than washing and reusing things. There's a big problem with that though. Plastic sticks around. Even though plastics have really only been around for 150 years, scientists calculate that it will take hundreds of years for most plastics to fully break down or biodegrade. In the meantime, plastic piles up, blows around, and floats downstream into oceans and lakes, harming animals and polluting waterways.
I'm gonna move to an island and yank my lunch from the sea. I'll roll around by the seashore and let the sun beat down on me.
And when plastic does break down, it just breaks down into tinier and tinier pieces, called microplastics, which can be eaten, drunk, or even breathed in by animals and humans. So we have plastic, a material that lasts pretty much forever, but often we use it to make things that we throw away immediately. Doesn't make much sense, does it? We call these things single-use plastics. As I've said, however, humans are brilliantly creative, and we know how to solve problems, even problems we created ourselves. Scientists are working on better ways to create improved plastics that break down more easily, better recycling processes, and even ways to clean up existing plastic garbage. But something we can do right now to help is to cut down on using single-use plastic in the first place. Each time you go grocery shopping, get food at a drive-thru, or get carry-out from a restaurant, you are getting, using, and throwing away plastics. Wrappers, bags, straws, lids, plastic forks, plastic spoons, and plastic knives, which are often individually wrapped in plastic. All that plastic trash every time? No good. I decided that I could do something myself to help out. I designed this cutlery case. Instead of using a new plastic fork every time I eat out, I carry my cutlery with me and use and reuse it. Using some denim from some old jeans with holes in them, and some buttons I saved, an embroidery needle and some embroidery floss, I made a slim, durable, washable sleeve so I can carry my eating utensils with me. I made this out of fabric because I like sewing, but there are plenty of different ways to make a great case for your forks and spoons. Learn how to make this one with my cutlery case how-to, posted with this video. Speaking of forks and spoons, it's likely your parents don't want you to take their forks and spoons out of your house. My mom definitely wouldn't. That flatware is expensive and all matchy, and it's possible you might forget it somewhere or lose it. So you should probably leave it at home. However, you can find metal forks and spoons for a quarter or 50 cents a piece at most secondhand stores. They wash up nicely, plus you can choose from all kinds of designs to individualize your cutlery case. And if you accidentally lose them, it's not such a big deal. It's not expensive to replace, and your family will still have forks and spoons to eat their dinner. Take your fork and spoon with you in this small case. Keep them in your book bag or purse or in the car. Use them, wash them, use them again, wash them again. The washing is key. Over time, you'll stop hundreds of plastic pieces from going into the landfill, ending up in the ocean, hurting animals, or blowing around on our beautiful planet. This is just one idea of one way to upcycle. Keep in mind, the true master of upcycling can reuse many materials and can keep all kinds of things from going to waste, not just plastics. Pay attention to what you would normally throw away. See if you can find a way to make something instead of buying it new. Look for ways to cut down on single-use plastics. Take time to learn skills like sewing, painting, carpentry. We need your creativity and dedication to protect our planet from the hidden costs of making more stuff. Become a master upcycler. There are endless great resources for you to get inspired to make your own upcycling projects. High Plains Library District has many great books and electronic resources with information about taking care of our planet, as well as inspiration and instructions for upcycling projects galore. Take a look at our recommended resources list below and explore all the library has to offer as you master upcycling. Thank you for attending Upcycling University. I've never seen a more promising batch of students. Now go forth and never stop learning, creating, and protecting our planet. You're still here. You can go. This is getting awkward. Welcome. I'm Bridget Parker of the High Plains Library District, and this is a how-to video for making a cutlery case as part of Upcycling University. This cutlery case project is awesome for the environment, times two, because you can use old items like fabric, buttons, and silverware instead of throwing them away. And using it helps you cut down on single-use plastics when you go out to eat. To create your cutlery case, you will need a rectangle of fabric. Thicker fabric works better. I used denim from an old pair of jeans. Embroidery floss in whatever colors you like. An embroidery needle. A button. I found this on an old costume and decided to use it. Straight pins to hold your project in place while you work. An iron. Fabric scissors. And a fork and a spoon. I bought these at a thrift store very cheaply and they cleaned up beautifully. When you have all your items assembled, we'll be ready to start. Our first step is to cut our fabric into the shape that we'll need. You start with a rectangle. To find out how big to make this rectangle, take your longest piece of cutlery, place it 1/2 inch from the bottom to make a seam allowance, and then fold the fabric over. It should just touch where the handle of the fork meets the head of the fork. It should be wide enough so that when you fold it in half, there's plenty of room for your cutlery to fit. First, fold your rectangle in half lengthwise. Use your fork to measure where you're going to cut. Put your fork 1/2 inch from the bottom, then measure halfway between the tines and the place where the tines meet the head of the fork. Halfway there, make a very small cut. This is just to mark it so you know where to cut later. At the top of the tines and right along this fold, pinch the fabric to make a second cut, just to measure. We'll be cutting down along that fold and then over to our first measurement. And you can see where the cuts are as a guide to help you know where to snip. There's our first cut. Our second cut will go straight from the end of that cut to that first mark that we made. Don't worry about getting it perfect. We'll be finishing this seam and you won't see this edge in our finished piece. When we're folding our edges and pinning them, you might notice that when one edge is folded and we start on the second edge, we get this strange little corner sticking up. We're going to trim the corners off of our fabric to avoid this problem. Just a little triangle from each edge, and again, it does not have to be perfect. This is a handmade project and it will have that handmade look, which is kind of fun. So there are 5 corners on this shape, and then there's an inside corner. We're going to make a little snip no longer than a ladybug in that corner. That's going to help us fold our edges in nicely. Let me get these corners out of here. Now to fold an edge, we're going to fold just about 1/4 inch down. Pinch it between your fingers. Take a straight pin. Put the pin all the way through the project, both layers, and then pull it back out so you'll be able to see it on both sides. We'll pin all the way around the whole project, and I'll see you when we've got that done. A little note, as you pin around the edge, your pins don't need to be very close together, just enough to hold it in place while you iron. There we go. You can see that I've pinned all the way around the edge of my project. There's a little tiny bit of an edge all the way around, and now I've plugged in my iron to heat it up. I'm going to iron these edges down. This way they'll stay where they're supposed to while I'm sewing, and I won't have to sew with all of these little pins poking my hands the whole time. I'm going to remove all of the pins and iron it one more time without the pins. Make sure when you take pins out, you put them right back where you keep them. It is no fun to find one with the bottom of your foot. I'm ironing all these edges down without the pins now that I have a guide. The flatter you can get these, the nicer it will be when you're trying to sew your project together. There are a lot of little things that you can do like this in sewing to sort of do your future self a favor. Now that this is all ironed down, we're going to fold it lengthwise again And you can see it's starting to come together. This will be the pocket where your silverware will go in. We're going to pin this in place together to get it ready to begin sewing. Just enough to hold it in place so you don't have to hold it while you're trying to sew it. So probably this will just take 3 or 4 pins to do these first couple of edges. And when you're pinning, make sure each little flap is sticking down under where you want it to be before you put the pins in. Again, it's all about doing yourself little favors for later. So there's the beginning of our case. It's time to get our embroidery needle and floss ready to sew. To figure out how long you want your floss to be for your project so you don't have to start over with a new piece of thread halfway through, a good guide is to sort of lay the thread around the perimeter of what you're gonna do and then double that, maybe even a little bit more. It's better to have a little too much than too little when you get going. All right, I'm gonna thread this. So you're gonna have a little short end coming through one end of the needle, and then at the end of your long end of thread, how many more times can I say end? Tie 1 knot. That's gonna keep your thread from pulling all the way through when you make your first stitch. Sometimes the trick with thread this long is to make sure between each stitch that it's not tangled. We're going to start in the corner of the fabric where the fold meets the short edge, and we'll start by putting our needle inside this fold and pulling it through to the outside. And I'll show you why. Let's get that all the way through. That little tail at the end behind the knot, we'll be able to tuck it inside, and after we're finished sewing, you won't even be able to see it. So the stitch that I'm gonna use for this is called a whip stitch, and that's a stitch that just spirals around the edge all the way down. It's the simplest stitch, or one of the simplest stitches, but if you want to challenge yourself and go for something a little bit different, there are a lot of good stitches you can use. It's easy to find short tutorials on YouTube. One of my favorites is a blanket stitch. The blanket stitch ends up looking like this with a line all the way down the seam. That's easy to do. When you're learning how to do projects, it's good to increase your toolbox of things that you know how to do and keep learning as you go along. So this whip stitch, I'm just going in through the back, pulling the needle out through the front, making sure it's not tangled on anything as I pull it all the way through. You want your stitches to be even, around the same distance apart and around the same size for each stitch, if you can. Again, this is a handmade project. It's going to look handmade and have that awesome look. Don't worry about it too much. You can take your pins out as you go, just to keep your hands from getting poked. I'm going to keep sewing all the way down the short edge, turn the corner, and go up the longer edge to there. And I'll see you when we get there. We're getting close to the edge of the pocket here, so I'm gonna move that last pin out of the way and make sure my edges are tucked under and sew up to the edge here. And then we're gonna keep going all the way around the perimeter. We're gonna continue to sew all the way up along this edge, along the top, and back down. We're coming around the edge of the design to the front pocket. So I'm just gonna make a couple of more stitches, and while I'm doing that, I wanna mention that if you make a mistake, if you put a stitch where you don't want it, or your stitch is the wrong size, or you're just not happy with it, it's easy to take a stitch out. What you will do is take the needle off of your embroidery floss and use it to sort of ease under that stitch and pull the thread back through. and then you can rethread your needle and keep going. All right, we're coming to the pocket part of our project. You've been going from the outside to the inside this whole time. You're gonna keep doing that even as you move across this pocket. You're sewing from the outside to the inside and keeping that little flap that you ironed down inside the pocket as you sew. It's a little bit different because you're going a slightly different direction since we're only doing the pocket. But keep doing that all the way across, and then I'll show you how to finish off the end of your seam. We're coming to the end of the seam on the front of the pocket. We'll just do a few more stitches to get all the way to the edge and meet up with that first seam. Keep trying to make sure things are tucked in there. All right, now we've come to the end. We're going to finish off our stitch by locking it in place so that we can take the needle off and the thread doesn't unravel. So we'll flip to the inside seam of our pocket to that one little single layer flap of fabric. Make a small stitch in the fabric. Don't pull it tight because you'll pucker your fabric, but then go through that exact same spot 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now when you cut your thread, it's not gonna come undone later on. And the last step is to just tuck that tail back under the flap by taking your needle and going down through one more time before you trim it. Now that loose end is going to be down inside underneath the seam where it won't be seen. Also, you might notice some loose threads around the inside of the flap of your case. That's normal because remember we have that cut edge of fabric here. You can pull those off, and over time, you might even need to trim them, but it will stop unraveling because we made that nice seam there. Our cutlery case design has a button and loop closure. So we'll be making this loop and sewing on this button for this next part of the tutorial. The first thing you'll need to do is measure where you're going to put your loop and your button. So put your silverware into your case, fold down the flap, and use a straight pin right where the flap meets the case in the center to mark where your loop will be. You can use just a single piece of embroidery floss to make this loop, but I liked how it looked when I braided 3 colors together, and it's also a thicker loop, which is nice. So I'm gonna show you how to make that loop. The first thing to do is to choose 3 strands. They can all be the same color, all different colors, however you wanna do it. And we're going to put the ends together and cut off a piece about 7 or 8 inches long and tie one end of all of the 3 together, right close to the end. Then we're going to attach this to our case right where that pin is using our embroidery needle. So I'm gonna thread this needle. And starting at the back of the case where the pin goes through, I'm just gonna put that needle through and pull it. So only the yellow thread's gonna come through, but I'm gonna repeat that with the green thread and the red thread. And now that that's through, I can move that pin out of the way as well. Okay, now all 3 threads are sticking through the front of my case. There's that knot inside. I'm going to braid these threads. So in order to do that, you'll need something to hold your case still because you'll be working with both your hands on that braid. I have my heavy little bird buddy here I'm gonna use, but you can also ask a friend or a family member to help you by holding your case. So to braid, you may not know, or you might, you have your 3 strands and you start with the outside strand and cross it over the middle. Take the other side, cross it over the middle, and just repeat that all the way down this strand. Keep braiding that till you have 3 or 4 inches of braid, and then tie a knot at the end of that braid to keep it from coming undone in the next part of the project. Now you're simply going to reverse what you did before by threading each color through 1 strand at a time next to where you came out. Make sure your needle goes inside and not all the way through the back of the project, because you don't want to sew that shut. Repeat that with all 3 strands. Once you have all 3 strands sticking back through to the inside of your case, tie a knot. I'm just going to put 2 in one hand, 1 in the other, and tie that double knot. Easy peasy. Pull it nice and tight. You can trim your ends. Don't trim them too close to the knot or those knots will come undone. And voila, a loop. The next thing to do is to measure where you're going to sew that button. So put your silverware back inside your cutlery case, put the flap down, and put the loop up over the flap. You're going to pin right where that button's going to go, right inside that loop. Same way in the center. Oops, now I've pinned my loop to it. That's okay. I can take my loop off. That's where your button's going to go. Thread your needle again with a little bit shorter piece of floss, and don't forget to knot the long end. Joe's red, because I think that will look great with my gold button. Put your thread through the flap of your case, right where that pin is, and then you can move the pin out of the way. Oh, you may also want to move your silverware out of the way. And you can start to sew your button on. Now this is a button with a loop to put the thread through, but there are, of course, buttons with 2 holes in them and 4 holes in them. Those are fairly simple. You're just going up through 1 hole and down through the other and repeating that 3 or 4 times until that button is on there well. And remember, when we finished off that seam of the thread, as we went around the perimeter of the case, you went through the same spot 3 times to tie off the thread. It's the same concept with a button. You don't have to go through it a million times. I tend to go 4 or 5 just to be on the safe side and keep that button secure. But once that's through that many times, you can just cut it off. And it should stay. Okay, one more time for luck. Pull that through and trim that off. All right, now we've got our case with a nice button closure. Let's try it on for size. Beautiful.
This is a design I invented, and I made little changes as I went when I found ideas I liked better. Because I enjoy sewing, I made a fabric case, but you may have even better ideas using different materials or methods. And that's at the heart of upcycling. As you use your creative brain to design and as you build up skills, your creations will be better and better. You will truly be master of upcycling.